Hello guys, welcome to the fourth lecture of Introduction to Urbanism. So today we're going to talk about the modern movement. We are moving forward in history because we were in the 19th century. So now we are moving forward. Well, in a few words, do you remember what was happening? Well, first of all, we are talking about the industrial city, the industrial society, all the changes, technological developments, new materials. So it's a new society, and as a consequence, new cities. So how do we build, how do we plan these new cities? That was the question. Urban planning focus on the functionality. You will see that modernism it's focused on function. What is it for? So it's not concerned about aesthetics. What is it for? And is it functional? So it's focused on the functionality of the modern citizen. So housing, circulation, leisure, and work. And also the cities were separated in zoning, so separate areas of the city according to its function. Only one part of the city separated for work, the other part is separated for leisure, and the other part for housing. Well, they believed the city could solve social problems, and also this during that time you will see better articulation between urbanism and architecture. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the International Congress and the Athens Charter. So all right, let's start. With the transition to the 20th century, what was happening during this transition? So there were architectural expressions with aesthetic value, historical value. So if you are studying urbanism, you're probably studying architecture. So you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about classical and eclectic buildings. And so the eclectic architecture was a combination of elements from various architectural styles from the past. So you have new materials, you have iron, steel. So they were asking themselves, why are we using these new materials in languages of architecture that are related to the past? Why don't we create something different, something that expresses the spirit of time? So you have modernism as a rational, functional architecture. You have the construction techniques and the contemporary materials of the time, iron, steel, and later reinforced concrete. This is what they were thinking, the modern thought. So the schools of architecture, they were not incorporating the industrial reality and the new demands of the city into their architecture. They were thinking that this type of architecture was not expressing the spirit of that time. So the architects, they should have awareness of their own time, the social political context, because in the 20th century we have the First and the Second World War, which will definitely change all the context. Actually, sorry, all the context. So then you have, as I said, a period of experimentation. You have architects trying to incorporate new materials into the style, the expression, the language of styles from the past. So you have an experimentation of combining different elements, and then you have different schools and different thoughts appearing after this period of what I call experimentation. We're talking about this period of transition. You end up talking about the Chicago School, which is right in the transition of the centuries. So I put the names of the architects, and basically the urgency of the fire. There was a big fire, so there was an urgency to rebuild. So the urgency of quick and efficient reconstruction and the great demand for real estate give rise to a new construction process identified by the typology of the skyscraper. So basically during this time, what we had was buildings with this style. They were able to add elevators, and they were able to build skyscrapers. And as I said, they were concerned with it being quick, the reconstruction. So this is the famous saying that form follows function. So you think, if you think about the function, if you build, if you design thinking about the function, then the form will be constructed by itself, let's say. That was the idea of the modernism. Architecture is extremely important in Brazil. So I would like you to think about the place you're from. During this time, like the beginning of the 20th century, what was happening in your city? Did your city receive any kind of influence from the modern movement? Because here in Brazil, it was a period of time that was crucial for us, because we were trying to find a new way of expressing our native architecture. So as we could adapt a lot of this architecture, and because the modern architecture provided, they were concerned about climate, about comfort. So in Brazil, this type of architecture was and is extremely used, and in Brazil it was extremely important. So I would like you to think about your city. What was happening during this period from, for example, 1925 and on? Was there any type of influence, and what type of influence? Think about it historically and in terms of architecture as well. This is just as a curiosity that the prefabricated and unadorned Chicago window in 1877, it facilitated the construction of skyscrapers. Well, the modern has much more to do with a social cause than an aesthetic one, as I said. Form is a consequence. So this is the first building to use steel as the internal and external structure. It was the first skyscraper with 10 floors, so 42 meters high, and the project is by William LeBaron. And well, when we talk about modernism, of course, we have to talk about the School of Bauhaus, because it was where all the ideas and where all the influence came. So this was a school founded in 1919, and I put a few examples of what they were producing, because during that time this was the first design school. So they were trying, what they wanted was the architect, the professional, to have a more holistic formation. So you would study form, you would study colors, you would study construction. It was a more integrated education. So this is a little bit about the who studied the colors. These are just examples. You can try to find a little bit more about it, because this topic is extremely deep, so it requires a little bit more of time to read. So I put here a few examples of professionals who collaborated a lot for the school. And of course, when you talk about modernism, you have to talk about Le Corbusier. He was one of the most important architects, because he synthesized, he organized all the ideas. He came to Brazil. He influenced a lot of architects here in Brazil. So he introduced a new type of architecture. So that's why he is always cited when you talk about urbanism and modernism. You've all heard this sentence that less is more. This is also from the modernism, which cared about minimalism. You only have what you need. You don't need a lot of stuff. So this is the famous sentence by Ms. van der Rohe: less is more. And during that time, there were also happening the International Congresses of Modern Architecture in 1928. So it was a group of architects responsible for defining what is usually called the international style. International style was like a nickname for the modern architecture. So they got together to discuss not only architecture, but also to discuss the industrial city. So it was a group from different countries that got together to discuss and debate about architecture and urbanism. Just to continue with a little bit more of contextualization of the Congress, we are now in the period of after the World War I, and during that time it was already formed the modern movement, the School of Bauhaus. We already talked about the major urban interventions, Haussmann, Serdar. There was also the exhibition of Weissenhof in Germany. So it was a collection of different houses, different ideas by different architects of what was this modern and different architecture. So you have here a list of all the architects who participated and all of their buildings. Think about these congresses. So the most important thing was the fact that in a world full of confusion, of fragmentary efforts, a small international group of architects felt the need to come together in an attempt to see as a unitary whole the multifaceted problems that confronted them. So the diversity of problems regarded to cities. And as a result, I put here all the meetings. So there were 10 of them, all organized here through date. And the topics, the first one was the foundation of the Congress. So they talked about housing, they talked about the functional city. It was on the fourth meeting that the Athens Charter originated as a result. So they were talking about housing, leisure, how to survive in this new city. And as I said, the main object and purpose that brought the architects together was to debate all the elements of contemporary architecture of that time, of course, and give architecture a real social and economic meaning. Architecture must therefore free itself from the influence of it's talking about that type of architecture, of classical architecture. So it has to find a new language, a new expression. So all the topics that they were discussing were the reduction. As I said, you only have what you need. So they were reducing the space of what they called, for example, there was the functional kitchen designed by Margaret Schut. So she studied the size and the design of the smallest kitchen and the smallest and functional kitchen she could ever design. So this is an example of the functional kitchen. And well, what was in this document? Why is it so important? This is what I ask you. It is important because they've reached 25 conclusions about the city. I highly recommend you to read all the 25 topics and try to analyze and understand. Try to understand, because it is in this document that they say that the keys to modern urbanism is divided in 4 functions: housing, work, leisure, when you have free time, of course, and circulation. So transportation was important. This is an important picture because it is a proposal of Le Corbusier of the modern city, where here in the middle you can see that it's the housing part, and you can see that the city, by the drawing, you can see by this model, you can see that it's divided, it's separated in different areas, as I already said, the 4 areas of the city. So his proposal was to remove all existing fabric from Paris and replace it with 60-story buildings in the shape of a cross. Well, I mean, the proposal, once again, When I say once again, it's because Hosman has already proposed that, which is to remove and demolish what was there, which is something that it's afterwards in the next lecture you will see that it's the main critique that the project received, because when you propose something like that you are erasing all the history of the city. Of course, this proposal here wasn't built. Well, and when you talk about modern cities, of course, you have to talk about Brasilia, and there is also the example of Chandigarh in India. So these are interesting cities that I recommend you to study. Unfortunately, I don't really have time to explore in detail, but basically Brasilia has all the elements that the modern movement believed. So I want to end this lecture with this picture because I think it's interesting. And I would like you to see and think about it because I think it still represents, it's still a very recent case in our cities. So yeah, thank you for watching and see you in the next lecture. Bye.